coping at all.
I guess you might be wondering how a young kid could even know about suicide, let alone attempt to take their own life. Well, in Australia, suicide rates within the Indigenous population are substantially higher than the non-Indigenous population, over double in fact. And Yarika says that Quaden had been to funerals for people who'd taken their own lives. Plus, his understanding of death was deepened by Indigenous grieving protocols called sorry business. All this to say that Quaden was having a really rough time.
He would beg not to send him to school anymore because he just couldn't handle the bullying. I wasn't aware of how much it was impacting and affecting Quaden because he wouldn't tell me straight away. He didn't want to be the person that was coming home dobbing all the time. And it wasn't until things got really bad, he'd get dressed and I'd be in the car park sending him to school and he'd just break down and have an anxiety or panic attack. And this was a 9-year-old child telling me that he just can't do it anymore, He doesn't want to be here anymore. School's too hard. He can't handle the name calling every day and the teasing.
Quaden ended up being homeschooled for a while. But one day, the local basketball team, the Brisbane Bullets, was going to visit his school. And the principal knew how much Quaden loved sports, so suggested he come in to meet them.
And as soon as Quaden heard that, he put his basketball boots on, his school uniform on. He was at school within an hour because Quaden is such a little sports fanatic. He just wanted to be at school to meet the Bullets and get on that basketball court. So I took him to school and then picked him up just a bit before 3 o'clock. So we saw Quaden on the basketball court and they were all lining up to get their Brisbane Bullets basketball jerseys signed. And then that's when I saw a couple of the girls in Quaden's class. One of them pat Quaden on the head and made reference to his height. So she was putting her hands to her waist, measuring where Quaden was up to on her. And they all, were having a little laugh and a giggle and thought it was really funny. And as soon as he got his thing signed, he just stormed off to the car. And that's when he just broke down. I was consoling him, asking him what did he want me to do about it. And he was just like, no, don't touch me, I'm just sick of it.
Yarika rang the school principal, who told her that the children's parents would be told of the incident. A warning that what comes next is pretty distressing.
And I said, no, that's not enough. This is the same thing that's been going on, and you speaking to the parents isn't obviously solving anything. I think we need to start doing more. So I got off the phone from the principal and I just, Quaden was still hysterical. He wanted me to do something there and then. And I said, I don't know what else to do, Quaden, but I want everyone to see how this is impacting you. So I pressed record. So I've just picked my son up from school, witnessed a bullying episode, rang the principal, and I want people to know, parents, educators, teachers,
I'm going to do with them.
This is what bullying does. So can you please educate your children, your family, and, it was a 6-minute video of me just showing the world exactly what a day in the life is like for us, because this is a regular occurrence.
The video that Yarika live-streamed shows Quaden really upset. He's crying and saying some pretty disturbing things, that he wants to take his own life.
You watch me? Even you think, Carolyn, I'm looking at you. You don't even do anything. Everything's good.
And I didn't think anything of it, it was just my personal Facebook page. I pressed play and shared that video in the hopes of raising more awareness. So hopefully we can make some changes so that this doesn't happen to another family, and hopefully we don't lose another young innocent life to bullying. I don't think anyone could have predicted the whirlwind and the roller coaster that we was about to experience.
Then Yarika just put down her phone and they went to the shopping mall to cheer up Quaden.
And then we just went home, had dinner and went to bed. And we were woken at 7 a.m. The next morning, which was Thursday the 20th of February, by reporters and media outside our door. And I was just like, what the hell is going on? Who are these people? Where have they come from and what do they want?
Quaden was plunged into the spotlight after his mother posted a video of him crying and expressing suicidal thoughts.
In it, Quaden tells his mum he wants to take his own life. The video has been watched millions of times.
Bale's video has shone a light on the terrible impact bullying can have.
I woke up to my phone just being inundated with calls from all over the world and inboxes and emails, just being hounded to try and, get our story. It was really overwhelming. I didn't know how to deal with it, so I just packed up and went down the coast and tried to escape it, but no matter where we went, media were following us. This was like paparazzi, like people were driving past us in the car, even recording us while we're driving. There was just no escaping it.
Plus, there was intense scrutiny of Yarika herself, that she shouldn't have posted a video when Quaden was in such a vulnerable moment.
Because usually it's me, doing a live video, showing his crazy, humorous side, being cheeky or playing pranks at home, telling his jokes or dressing up, being the crazy kid that he is. Usually I just highlight all the positives. And this was a very different occasion where I pressed play and shared a very sensitive moment, and in the hopes of bringing people's attention to, what happens in our life on a regular occurrence.
She decided to stand by the video.
I had to weigh things up and, I thought, well, yeah, I did share a video. I didn't expect it to go viral. I just wanted to get the message out there, and I just wanted this to stop. I wanted my son not to feel like he doesn't want to be alive anymore.
It was really overwhelming, but in some cases it was positive. Really encouraging things were happening. Thousands of people, including celebrities like the actor Hugh Jackman, started posting videos of support.
Quaden, you are stronger than you know, mate. And no matter what, you got a friend in me.
And then another celebrity, an actor with dwarfism called Brad Williams, got in touch. He suggested setting up a crowdfunding campaign to send Quaden to the theme park, Disneyland.
I didn't have a good feeling about it, but Quaden was like, Mum, please, please, please. He's always wanted to go to Disneyland and go to the NBA and meet all his celebrities and favourite sports stars. So I was like, okay, cool, man. I gave Brad permission to go ahead with the GoFundMe and didn't expect it to go as far as it did. Within the first 24 hours, it had reached the 10K goal.
More people kept donating and donating. Eventually, they'd gone so far beyond the $10,000, they were in the hundreds of thousands of dollars.
This GoFundMe started going viral, and then things turned.
They turned really badly.
And all these conspiracy theories started happening, and that's when things really started turning really, really nasty, really dark, and we started experiencing the dark world of cyberbullying.
Quaden Bales is an Australian actor whose mum, Yarika, posted a fake sobbing video of him on Tuesday. The MSM and Hollywood fell for it and got him $300K plus in donations.
And what were the conspiracies?
So apparently Quaden is an 18-year-old actor and we're millionaires. We're already rich and famous.
What I'm seriously furious about is lying to people about your age.
Here you see this actor, kid, pretending that he's sad.
And people were photoshopping and cropping and manipulating a lot of the photos and videos from my personal accounts to make it look like, Quaden was older and Quaden's been drinking alcohol, and they were making note of Quaden's dress sense. They were just trying to paint us out to be a really bad family. I was just like, really? This is an innocent 9-year-old kid. He may not be the perfect child, but he is my perfect child, and he is somebody's son, somebody's brother, somebody's nephew and grandson. You don't talk about a child like that. It was just like a real eye-opener. It was such a reality check for me, because I felt really gullible and naive and vulnerable at that time, because our whole lives had just been posted all over the media.
It wasn't just lies. Even now, Yarika and her family face death threats.
very confronting messages, threatening messages to my family, the death threats and the threats of violence and, very detailed threats of what they're going to do to our whole family. And it was just like a real eye-opener. This was something that we definitely weren't ready for or experienced in. We got media advisors, I had to employ an agent. It was just like an overnight story that just went viral and turned our whole lives upside down.
But as the weeks passed, at some point Yarika was done trying to hide and done with all these conspiracies.
We're not going to be that depressed, anxious family member anymore. We're not going to be, suffering in silence anymore. I went to extreme measures in, producing his birth certificate and his passport online, showing his identification to prove that he is a child. So let him be a child and get on with his life.
And then Yarika called a lawyer, George Newhouse, and they fought and eventually had about 100 videos of the false conspiracies taken down.
When you look back at it, it could have cost a life, and people need to, hopefully from now on, need to know and make sure that they do their research or due diligence, find out the facts before you perpetuate the cycle of lies or conspiracy theories. If you're not 100% sure, if there is any doubt in your mind about something you're sharing on a social platform, then you've got to really ask yourself, why are you sharing this? What purpose does it serve? Because a lot of people are learning the hard way now that you will not get away with it. There are consequences.
After all of those videos were taken down, how did you reflect on that experience and also, your view of the internet and human nature?
I thought, I have healthy boundaries. I've always got my guard up. But there are moments where I am vulnerable, like the time I took that video, where I have dropped my guard because I felt safe and I felt there was no other, I'd tried everything else, so this was something that I wanted to do. I've experienced firsthand the negative effects that social media can have, but it doesn't deter me. It actually adds fuel to the fire in my belly to continue to use social media for the powerful platform because it can reach a lot more people. We know what's true. We know we are a strong, beautiful, healthy, loving, happy family. Yeah, we're crazy at times and we've, got family dramas like most other families in the world. We're human. We're not perfect. But we are a big, strong, healthy, loving and supporting family and community. And that's what's gotten us through.
So going back to this whole idea of how one click can transform a life. Well, aside from the difficulties, a lot of great stuff has happened through the video. Yarika and Quaden were connected with a social skills educator who has been guiding Quaden through issues at school and giving him more coping strategies. And as for the money, in total the campaign raised about $450,000. They decided it wasn't the right decision to go to Disneyland in the end, and the money has been split between 6 charities, while a small amount has been kept in trust for Quaden. And in super exciting news, Quaden was also cast in a small part in George Miller's next movie, starring Idris Elba and Tilda Swinton. So, somewhat ironically, he is an actor now. And what's your relationship like with Quaden now?
It's not your average mum and son relationship. I think we get on more like best friends because he's my little shadow, he's with me 24/7, literally 24/7. I cannot go anywhere without him. Even though he's 10 years old, he is a very protective person. He takes his role of man of the house very seriously. He's my son, but he's my best mate. He's my little comedian, my little prankster. He's my little apprentice chef. He's my everything, He's not just my son. He is so much more than my son. And just talking about him, I can smile now. I don't cry and break down like I used to because I can see him for the beautiful soul that he is. And he just has so much love and light.
Your mum also told me that you're the man of the house and that you really try and take care of her. Is that right?
Yes. Yes.
And how do you take care of your mum?
I make sure no boys come in their house.
I have to stay single for the rest of my life. He repels all the men. He's like my repellent. Very protective.
Well, it must be because you love your mum a lot, right?
Yes.
Well, thank you for talking to me, Quaden, and thank you for talking to me, Yarika. I really appreciate you taking all the time.
No problem. Thank you, Saskia.
No problem.
Don't copy me.
Thank you, Quaden. Copycat, actor and fashionista Quaden Bales, talking to me with his mum and best friend Yarika Bales. If this program has raised any issues for you and you're looking for some support, you can find contacts for organisations if you search for BBC Action Line. There'll also be a link in the program notes for this episode on our website. This has been Outlook. I'm Saskia Edwards. Thanks for listening.
This is the BBC World Service, and on the Inquiry this week...
In space, there are thousands of artificial satellites and millions of pieces of man-made trash. There's no global law to regulate rubbish and so far nothing in place to remove it. I'm Charmaine Cozier. Can we solve our space junk problem?
The Inquiry at bbcworldservice.com/inquiry. And in half an hour, it's Africa Life Clinic.
We'll be looking at big ripples from a small study, South Africa's COVID-19 vaccine research, which found one of the leading contenders may not be effective in some cases, and also fibroids. They affect far more women than you might think, yet still the causes are unclear.
This is the BBC World Service, the world's radio station.
On from our own correspondent after this bulletin, a delicate question of loyalty.
The United States, Britain and France have strongly condemned the use of force by the authorities.
Facebook has deleted the main page of the Myanmar military. In a statement, the company said it had removed the page in accordance with its policy on prohibiting the incitement of violence. Israel is lifting some coronavirus restrictions from today, with gyms, hotels, shops and places of worship allowed to reopen. But entry to these venues is being restricted to people who have been vaccinated or who have recovered from the virus, with a so-called green pass as proof. Dr. Maya Peled-Raz, head of Community Health and Ethics Research at the University of Haifa, said the move was vital to reopen the economy.
closed, okay? So what we are trying to do is actually ease the closure. And what we are trying to do now in Israel is gradually open up the economy. So we are allowing to those who are vaccinated to rejoin the economy, cultural endeavors. So if you want to join those people, you need to get vaccinated.
People in Niger are voting today in the second round of a presidential election. The governing party's Mohamed Bazoum secured 40% of the vote in the first round. His rival is a former president, Mahaman Ousmane, who tallied 17%. Ali McConnell reports.
Niger's current head of state, Mahamadou Issoufou, is stepping down after serving 2 terms in office. In doing so, he's making history. The transition is set to be the first peaceful handover of power since Niger secured independence from France in 1960. But whoever wins the presidency will face huge challenges. Niger remains one of the poorest countries in the world, and the region is battling an insurgency by Islamist militants affiliated with Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State group.
This is the latest world news from the BBC. The head of the UN nuclear watchdog, the IAEA, is holding talks in Tehran ahead of today's deadline set by Iran for US sanctions to be lifted. Iran is threatening to restrict visits to some of its nuclear facilities. Ahead of his talks with Rafael Grossi, Iran's top nuclear official, Ali Akbar Salehi, said they would discuss concerns over the halt of the inspections, as well as Iran's cooperation with the agency. The Japan Coast Guard has said 2 Chinese government vessels have made an incursion into Japanese territorial waters for a second consecutive day. The vessels went near a group of uninhabited islets known in Japan as the Senkaku and in China as the Diaoyu. Officials say it's the 9th time this year that Chinese government vessels have entered Japanese waters. Last week, the US Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, voiced concern about Chinese activities in the East China Sea. The Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison has become one of the first people in the country to receive a coronavirus vaccination. A broader rollout begins on Monday. Speaking at a clinic in Sydney, Mr Morrison insisted the jab was safe and he encouraged Australians to get inoculated.
Tens of thousands of people will be coming in tomorrow, and I wanted them to know, as they went to bed tonight, that we have been able to demonstrate our confidence in the health and safety of this vaccination, to let them know that it's good to go. And I was very happy to send that message today with my colleagues here.
Tennis, and Novak Djokovic is aiming to win his 9th Australian Open title. The Serb is taking on Russia's Daniil Medvedev, who has yet to win a Grand Slam. Victory would give Djokovic his 18th Grand Slam, bringing him closer to Rafael Nadal and Roger Federer, who have 20 each. On Saturday, Japan's Naomi Osaka won the women's singles title. And that's the latest BBC World News.
You're listening to From Our Own Correspondent here on the BBC World Service. I'm Pascal Harter. Hello and welcome to the programme. In this edition, an invitation to a tribal gathering in Yemen. We get insight from the elders there on how they think the country's conflicts should be solved. And we're on the hunt for food in Havana as Cuba feels a serious economic squeeze. First, though, to Kosovo, Europe's newest country, which recently marked the 13th anniversary of its independence. An independence that was not easily achieved. Once, it was just a province of the former Yugoslavia, but there were historic tensions between the ethnic Serbs and ethnic Albanians who lived there. When Yugoslavia began to break up in the late 1990s, Kosovo's ethnic Albanians demanded a country of their own. In the bitter civil war that erupted, Yugoslav and Serb forces committed several infamous massacres of ethnic Albanians. Then, when the tide turned and the fighters of the Kosovo Liberation Army, or KLA, gained ground, Serbs were killed or forced out from much of its territory. Kosovo unilaterally declared its independence in 2008. It is, still now, a regional flashpoint. It is still not recognised as a state by some countries, among them Spain, Slovakia, Cyprus and Greece. And what, you might ask, has independence achieved for the people of Kosovo? What has it really delivered? Last weekend, Kosovans voted in a general election, defying below-zero temperatures and driving snow to cast their ballots, and handing a landslide victory to the opposition Self-Determination Party. Guy Delaunay has met its leader several times.
The first thing you notice about Albin Kurti is the twinkle in his eye, which is only fitting for someone with such a well-developed and well-documented capacity for mischief. One of our meetings came shortly after his arrest for lobbing canisters of tear gas in the debating chamber of Kosovo's National Assembly. It was, to put it mildly, an unorthodox way to announce his opposition to a border agreement with neighbouring Montenegro. But Mr. Kurti and his Self-Determination Party colleagues made such a habit of releasing noxious substances in Parliament that MPs began to turn up to work toting gas masks. I asked him whether he thought it was entirely appropriate for an MP in a democracy to behave in this way, and those eyes sparkled with mirth as he worked up a suitable metaphor. Tear gas clarified things in Kosovo. Now everyone can see better, he chuckled. He wasn't laughing when riot police stormed his party headquarters to take him into custody, but arrest and imprisonment were hardly daunting experiences for Mr. Kurti. He spent 2 years in a Yugoslav jail at the end of the 1990s for his membership of the Kosovo Liberation Army, refusing an offer of release if he signed a confession. His tear gas antics earned him 2 spells of pre-trial detention before a judge eventually gave him a suspended sentence for using offensive weapons, and that conviction disqualified Mr. Kurti from standing for re-election as an MP in the recent parliamentary election. But his party won almost half the vote, and in Kosovo the Prime Minister doesn't have to be a serving MP, so the way is clear for the notorious activist to complete a remarkable journey from the margins to centre stage. The second thing you notice about Albin Kurti is that for a man who wants to govern Kosovo, he seems awfully keen on Albania. On my visits to the Self-Determination Party's headquarters, the blue, white and gold flag of Kosovo has been conspicuous by its absence. In contrast, the red-framed Black Eagle of Albania has been on prominent display. The clue is in the party's name. Self-determination refers to the right of Kosovo's people to choose their own path, and the vast majority of those people are ethnic Albanian. The party has consistently pushed for a referendum on the unification of Kosovo with Albania. Mr. Kurti has said he's committed to governing Kosovo as an independent state, but after his party's crushing victory in the recent poll, he was asked how he would vote in a hypothetical unification referendum. Nobody was surprised to hear him say that he would vote in favour. So why have people voted in overwhelming numbers to be led by someone who, when it comes to the crunch, doesn't believe in Kosovo's future as an independent state? In essence, it's because they bought Mr. Kurti's line about the election serving as a referendum, not on unification with Albania, but on whether Kosovo should be governed by the old guard or the new broom. Self-determination have yet to prove they can keep their promise to clean up Kosovo, but the more established parties, dominated by Kosovo Liberation Army veterans, have demonstrably failed to live up to their pledges to bring prosperity. Ultimately, they've been better at serving themselves than the people they're supposed to govern. Corruption and nepotism are endemic, wages for those lucky enough to find a job are low, and hope is in short supply. Talk to people in the capital Pristina about the politicians who've led the country since Kosovo's independence from Serbia, and you'll soon discover why they want to believe in Mr. Kurti. I spent an afternoon in the garden of a city centre pub, chatting to the young members of staff about their plans. None of them saw a future in Kosovo. I want to go to Germany for a better life, one of them told me. No one really wants to leave, insisted a colleague, but you can't build a life in a system that's corrupt. The queues snaking along the side of the German embassy every day illustrate the disenchantment with life at home. Tens of thousands of people apply every year for entry visas to this country alone, and many will never return. Kosovo may be Europe's youngest country in terms of demographics as well as its own age as a state, but it can't afford to hemorrhage talented young people at this rate. So voters have turned to Mr. Kurti and his party in desperation as much as expectation. The big question is how much difference he can make when the old guard is so deeply embedded in state institutions, and he may not have the luxury of time. Voting for Kurti is a way of punishing the old ruling elite, a political analyst tells me. People are tired and looking to give this country a last chance. This is it. They've tried everything else. It's a sobering thought in what should be a week of celebration. Albin Kurti will need more than a twinkle in his eye to become the modern hero that Kosovo desperately wants to see.
Guy Delaunay. The new administration in the United States has moved the conflict in Yemen right up its list of foreign crises in need of attention. The United Nations recently warned that the country is heading for the worst famine the world has seen in decades and said the armed conflict there had taken a sharp escalatory turn. Mr. Biden's government has already reversed a decision by the previous administration to declare Yemen's Houthi rebels a terrorist organisation, an essential step, says the State Department, in getting aid to civilians who have long been in dire need. Armed groups from Yemen's Houthi community, backed by Iran, control large parts of the country. Recently, they've been accused of using snipers to shoot children. Meanwhile, since 2015, bombing raids by a Saudi-led international coalition, backed by, among others, the United Kingdom, have destroyed hospitals and infrastructure and killed many civilians, including children. The conflict has forced many Yemeni families to near starvation. Aid is one thing, but how to stop the conflict itself? Even before foreign powers weighed so heavily into the war, Yemen was a notoriously difficult country to govern. Long-term President Ali Abdullah Saleh described ruling his nation as like dancing on the heads of snakes. He was dislodged 10 years ago by a wave of public protests. Since then, Yemen's problems have only grown more acute, as regional divisions and armed groups have multiplied. In the south of the country, Leila Malana Allen heard about some of the challenges its elders are facing.
Driving out of Atak feels like a step into the unknown. The wide roads and low stone buildings start to fall away, seemingly piece by piece. They're half finished because the capital of Yemen's southern Shabwa governorate is in the midst of a construction boom. It looks almost as if the sand is fighting back, threatening to eclipse these little fingers of urbanization, probing into the desert's endless spread. We're on our way to meet representatives from some of Shabwa's dozens of tribes and sub-tribes. It's going to be a party tonight, says our guide. Cross-tribal gatherings this big usually only happen when there's a war council. We head northwest, but it's soon hard to keep track of where we are, as the rising clouds of sepia sand mix with the burnt orange and livid purple rays of the setting sun, creating a thick haze as the wheels struggle to navigate uncooperative sand dunes. As dusk wraps around the expanse, we pull over and the sand begins to settle. Twinkling lanterns appear, illuminating a winding snake of a receiving line of men waiting to greet us, each in traditional tribal dress. Ma'awas, long loincloths, imama, wrapped embroidered turbans, and jambiyas, tribal daggers. They're all men. Tribal women don't attend gatherings such as these. As we sit around rock-ringed campfires, munching on torn hunks of soot-blackened khubz el-markad, a coarse wheat bread beaten out on the sand and cooked on the hot firestones, the local leaders don't hold back. We're headless, says Alawi Ali Khalid, sheikh of the Khalifa tribe, bemoaning the fact that Yemen's president and most of his ministers have lived in exile since southern separatists seized Yemen's temporary capital of Aden in 2018. Since Yemen's civil war began 6 years ago, Shabwa has faced an invasion from the Iran-backed Houthi militia, air attacks from a coalition of foreign forces headed by Saudi Arabia and the UAE in efforts to push the Houthis back, and battles between multiple armed groups and central government forces. Yemen has been a theatre of political struggle for decades, and these men are no strangers to foreign interest in their lands. You could say you British know us better than we know ourselves, teases Sheikh Khalid, kneeling by the fire, his eyes sparkling with mirth, as he tucks his ankles expertly beneath the hem of his robe. He's referring to the British presence in the country for more than a century until 1967, a colonial legacy that provokes mixed responses here. But the British, at least, he says, had the sense to appoint a local emir to consult with the tribes on important decisions. The newer power players here have done little to engage with the historic peoples of this land. Yemen's domestic politics is multi-layered, as Sheikh Khalid puts it. In the US, they just have the donkey and the elephant, referring to the symbols of the Democratic and Republican parties. Here, we have too many political animals to count. This has been compounded by an evolving proxy war. Iran backs the Houthi militias, who now run the most populous parts of North Yemen, and Saudi Arabia and the UAE support the central government. The UAE is also backing the separatists and local militias in the south, adding yet more complexity to the web of allegiances. You might have 3 sons from under the same roof, each a member of a different political party, or fighting in a different group, points out one tribesman gravely. Some even joined the local Al-Qaeda affiliate for a time. But that doesn't make them any less a part of their tribe when they return, leaving the tribal elders caught in a delicate dance to preserve stability while trying to stay above the political fray. The state governor is the leader of his people, but so is the sheikh. If the state is strong, the tribe is weak, Al-Khalid explains. Because in recent years we've had less rule of law, we've had to step in. When clashes broke out in Attak in mid-2019 between Emirati-backed mercenaries allied with southern separatists fighting against government forces, tribal leaders intervened, trying to mediate. We had to stop them destroying our souk, says Al-Khalid. When he says the souk, or market, he means the whole city of Attak. By tribal law, there must never be weapons raised in the souk. It's seen as a protected space because all depend on it for survival. Many tribesmen in Shabwa still live traditionally, in tall, intricate mud brick houses near water sources and perched atop the hills that line the area's wadis, or valley streams. But they depend on the city for trade, healthcare, news and education. The tribe can provide protection and support, but not key infrastructure like roads and jobs in essential services. Of course we hope for our children to be educated and live in a strong, stable state, says Sheikh Saleh Jarbu of the Nisi tribe. Everyone here still respects tradition, but they also want the central government to remember and serve them. Since the clashes in late 2019, Shabwa has been firmly under the control of the central government, and many now hope a period of peace will lead to prosperity. The area's natural resources should help, chief among them oil and natural gas. But ever since oil was discovered in the country, more than 40 years ago, it's been a source of contention. Only 3 of Yemen's 22 governorates have oil, and Shabwa is one of them. But before the war, all the proceeds went into the central coffers. The tribes feel this is their land, and as such, their oil, and accuse past governments of trying to steal their wealth. In 2014, when Al-Qaeda was at the height of its influence in the area, recruitment videos targeted Shabwa's young men, telling them the government and foreign investors were trying to steal these resources from under their feet. A few decades earlier, an Awlaki tribesman tried to petition the previous president, Ali Abdullah Saleh, to hand over an oil field after producing a tribal land deed stating the area belonged to the Awlakis to the 7th level of earth and the 7th level of heaven, meaning it included anything under the ground too. He came away empty-handed. But now, Shabwa's new governor has sketched out a deal with the central government that allows Shabwa to keep 1/5 of the oil revenue from the province, which will be allocated to local infrastructure and services. In doing so, he's won the backing of the tribes. We gather around the meal spread on the floor of the tent. Masuba, sticky risen wheat soaked in rich honey and sesame oil, and wide flat trays of rice, goat meat, and neon red zawahik, a spicy salsa. Some of the younger men explain the order of the meal. The goat's heart is placed in front of the guest to prove the whole animal has been slaughtered, while the fillets around the spine are saved for the cook as a mark of respect. Despite the fast pace of development here, and the challenges of poverty and war, the old ways endure. Young boys crouch at the entrance to the tent, fingering the AK-47 slung over their shoulders as they watch their fathers wax lyrical about politics. The guns aren't loaded, they're just ceremonial for the grand gathering. When they're actually granted permanent weapons at 15 or 16, these boys will be considered men and bound by the obligations of asabiya, tribal loyalty and communal responsibility. Muhammad is 10. When I ask if he's proud to be a tribesman, he cocks an incredulous eyebrow at me. Of course I'm proud. I'm an Aulaki. Saif, who's 14, says he wants to be a doctor in the city, but doesn't see why that would be incompatible with staying true to his roots. A doctor is a doctor, and a tribesman is a tribesman. And as a tribesman, in hard times, you know you're among friends.
That was Leila Malana Allen. Next, we take you to Cuba, which right now is undergoing its worst economic woes since the euphemistically titled Special Period of the early 1990s. That was a time of severe austerity and shortages triggered by the collapse of the Soviet Union and the loss of Soviet subsidies. These days, long lines for basic staple foods like rice and beans are once again a common sight across the island. The luxuries, such as chicken or powdered milk, can take even longer to find. This comes as the Cuban government has actually undertaken some of its long-promised economic reforms, but also as the pandemic has pretty much choked off its hard currency income from tourism. Life, though, does go on, with its traditions and its markers of time passing. And that can be a bit of a challenge, says Will Grant.
The only slight difficulty of having a girlfriend whose birthday falls on Valentine's Day is that cakes in Havana can be hard to come by on that particular date. In a country experiencing its worst economic crisis since the Cold War, flour is scarce, as are butter, chocolate, vanilla essence, in fact pretty much all of the ingredients of a decent gâteau. In addition, there's always a last-minute rush around the 14th of February by feckless partners to find something sweet for their loved ones. Tracking down a birthday cake and a couple of bottles of wine for a small socially distanced gathering of a few family members can be a challenge. Undeterred, I set off 2 days earlier to reserve a cake in advance at an ice cream parlour near us that sells good ones. On arriving to pick it up the next day, I encountered the first of the big economic changes introduced by the government this year. Cuba's tangled dual currency system has been unified. Gone is the convertible peso, or CUC, and only the Cuban peso, or CUP, remains. The long overdue step has already caused some noticeable distortions in the economy. The government says there are 24 pesos to the dollar, but the streets say something very different. The black market rate for dollars is between 40 and 45 pesos, and that's already being reflected in the prices. Many stores and ice cream parlours are charging with the higher rate of exchange in mind. So a nice-looking chocolate cake, for example, costs 600 pesos. A reasonable price if you get your pesos at a preferential rate, but a small fortune if you don't. The queues outside virtually every food store in Havana now stretch around the block. The government recently allowed the use of the dollar on the island too, another major economic reform. Not in the form of actual greenbacks. Full dollarization would be a bad look for the last communist stronghold in the Western Hemisphere. Instead, people must use cards, either linked to Cuban bank accounts with dollar funds in them, or foreign credit cards from countries other than the US. The step, like the currency unification, has caused some short-term pain for plenty of families, especially those with no relatives abroad sending them remittances. With tourism all but shut down during the coronavirus pandemic, access to dollars is even more limited. So the queues form outside stores which still sell an erratic and narrow selection of food in local pesos from before dawn. Not that the lines outside the dollar stores are any shorter, for they are the places that, at least in theory, actually have some basic goods in them: cheese, meat, chicken, and personal hygiene and cleaning products. All of which goes to say that popping into a shop is complicated. Everything in Cuba is complicated right now, or as the Cubans themselves say so often, no es fácil, it's not easy. I first tried a supermarket a short drive away. No queue! I thought my luck was in. However, another reform blocked my path: the liberalisation of the private sector. Amid the crisis, the government has been forced to allow more private enterprise. The shop had been converted into a wholesale store for private business owners, and you needed to be a member to get in. It's an important development. Without the ability to buy legally in bulk, Cuban restaurant and bar owners previously have had to compete with the rest of us for what was on the supermarket shelves, and they would often empty them in a single trip. So the opening of a wholesale store was good news for restaurant owners, but got me no closer to my goal of buying some wine. Having tried a few smaller places and found them all bare, one final destination, the big supermarket on 3rd and 70th. The queue there is a thing to behold, a vast line of people who've spent upwards of 5 and 6 hours in the sun waiting their turn. When they are eventually allowed inside, it's yet more queuing, long groups of people snaking back from the meat counter and the checkouts. However, there is a small liquor shop at the back which has its own till and no queue. I threw myself at the mercy of the Communist Party official at the door, and after a few minutes of stony deliberation, she ordered one of her underlings to escort me straight to the off-licence to make sure I wasn't trying to jump the line. Wine procured, even if I'd wanted to buy anything else, the comment from a woman in an endless queue was enough to put me off. "Ay, no puedo más," she exclaimed, with a mixture of exhaustion and frustration. "I can't take it anymore." Millions of Cubans know how she feels.
Will Grant in Havana. That's all for this edition, but we'll have more stories of the lives behind the news headlines next weekend. Do join us then for more From Our Own Correspondent with me, Pascal Harter, here on the BBC World Service.
This is the BBC World Service, looking ahead to World Radio Day.
We may live in the digital age, but only half the world is currently online.
We didn't have no such thing as cell phones or anything.
Across the globe, from rainforests to deserts, remote communities are brought together by one thing.
We are broadcasting from solar energy. We're off the grid in the middle of the jungles.
I'm from Sfântu Gheorghe. I work here as a nurse and voluntary for Radio Civic, and I like it.
I'm Maria Margaronis. Tune in to discover the pleasures and power of community radio.
One of the main reasons why they wanted a radio station for the Navajo people was to keep the Navajo language alive.
Worldwide Waves at bbcworldservice.com/documentaries.
In a few moments here on BBC World Service, join me, Priscilla Nyethe, for Africa Live Clinic. We'll be feeling the big ripples travelling across the continent from South Africa's small study on a leading COVID-19 vaccine. There are now big questions about its rollout after researchers found it may not be effective in some cases. And also fibroids. These growths in and around the womb are far more common than you might think. That's all in Africa Live Clinic after the news.
BBC News, I'm John Shea. Crowds have again taken to the streets in Myanmar's cities to protest against this month's coup, despite Saturday's deaths of 2 demonstrators. Protest leaders say the crowds are gathering in greater numbers than before to show the authorities they won't be intimidated by violence. Earlier, Facebook deleted the main page of the Myanmar military. It said it was acting in accordance with its policy of prohibiting the incitement of violence. The army has been using Facebook to defend its coup. Israel, which has one of the fastest coronavirus vaccination programs in the world, is easing many of its restrictions. Gyms, hotels and shops are reopening, but only those carrying a green pass, proving that they've had the jab or recovered from the virus, will be allowed entry. The Indian company licensed to produce the AstraZeneca Oxford University vaccine has asked for patience from foreign governments who are awaiting their supply of the shots. The Iranian Foreign Minister Javad Zarif says talks with the US can start when all sides fulfill their obligations under the Iran nuclear deal, which the US withdrew from in 2018. Mr. Zarif was speaking ahead of a deadline that Tehran set for the US to lift sanctions. Otherwise, Iran would limit access by IAEA inspectors. But Mr. Zarif said ending snap inspections would not mean Iran abandoning the nuclear deal. Ecuador's election commission has announced the 2 candidates who will square off in the second round of the presidential election. They're the left-of-centre economist Andrés Arauz, who won almost a third of the votes in the first round 2 weeks ago, and the conservative banker Guillermo Lasso, who secured just under 20%. Tennis, and Novak Djokovic is aiming to win his 9th Australian Open title. The Serb is taking on Russia's Daniil Medvedev, who's yet to win a Grand Slam. BBC News.
Hello, I'm Priscilla Nyede, and this is Africa Live Clinic from the BBC World Service. Joining me from Lagos is Azizat Ola Oluwa, and here with me in Nairobi is Rhoda Othiambo.
Hi, Priscilla.
Today, we are looking at some of the problems revealed by South African research into the most promising COVID-19 vaccine for Africa, and what that might mean for the rollout.
We want to reduce the need for this whole issue to create another parallel industry or business where people will actually be selling vaccines at the street corners and, I'll give you a quick one. This is better than the government vaccine and all those kinds of shenanigans. We will not buy fake vaccines. We'll buy the real stuff.
More on that later. But first, we're exploring a health issue that disproportionately affects Black women, uterine fibroids. These are non-cancerous growths that develop in or around the womb. There is little research on what causes fibroids or how to prevent them. My colleague Azizat Ola Oluwa, who is the BBC News Women's Affairs journalist based in Lagos, has this report.
As a young girl in school, the pain during classes, the pain during school activities, the heavy bleeding, not understanding what was going on, made schooling quite difficult. And it didn't allow me to blossom 100%.
At puberty, Jeanne d'Arc started experiencing constant painful and heavy menstrual flows. She felt ashamed. This forced her into solitude due to the fear of stigma. Little did Jeanne know this would affect her reproductive health, as she would later be diagnosed with uterine fibroids.
And even at home, in spite of the fact that I always talked about being in pain, the suffering was always considered an integral part of the menstruation cycle, part of what we call at-home periods.
The most common symptom is bleeding, heavy menstrual bleeding, and sometimes it can be very heavy and it can be life-threatening.
Dr. Ngozi Obi, a gynecologist based in Lagos, Nigeria, was treated for fibroids in the past. She describes heavy bleeding like Jeanne experienced as one of the symptoms of fibroids.
When they are big, they tend to cause pressure symptoms on the surrounding organs, like on the bladder. They can compress the bladder, causing frequency of urination. It can also cause renal damage in long-standing cases. And then it can also affect the rectum. It can have constipation.
According to the USA's National Center for Biotechnology Information, an estimated 80% of Black women will develop uterine fibroids in their lifetime. They are also expected to experience fibroids at a younger age and often more severely.
Emotionally, I felt almost betrayed by my body.
Nana Kunama leads an advocacy group that creates awareness about fibroids in Ghana. She too has had her health challenges with fibroids, suffering a miscarriage in the process.
I'm someone who's very concerned about wellness, and I advocate for wellness, and I try to live a very healthy lifestyle. And so I almost felt like my body had betrayed me.
Uterine fibroids are non-cancerous growths that develop in or around the uterus. Despite being endemic in sub-Saharan Africa, there is little information about the problem and little sympathy. Jane Ejako experienced this with her doctor.
The first gynecologist I visited told me at the first meeting that I would need to have a surgery. I was not happy with that experience because I felt like he didn't take me through what my options were. He didn't give me enough information.
Nana Konama blames a lack of funds and government commitment for the little information about fibroids in Africa.
What would I consider as to blame for the lack of information? Research, right? A lack of research. And part of the reason there isn't a lot of research in there is because of institutional funding. So it goes to so many levels of the public health system. One of it is, as African countries, are we able to set our own health priorities?
Fibroids can be treated, and the USA Fibroid Center says the most common treatment option is surgery. But despite treatment being available in many parts in Africa, Dr. Ngozi Obi says the high costs and fear of surgery continue to deter many women, making them seek alternative cures.
There's medical treatment, then there's surgical treatment, and then laparoscopic treatment. Usually surgery could be myomectomy, that is removal of the fibroids. Then you also have hysterectomy, That's complete removal of the uterus. People still prefer traditional treatment to orthodox treatment. They feel that if you go for surgery, they will die. So they still believe that traditional medicine is the best method, which it isn't.
Nana Kunama underwent surgery to remove fibroids, and she has never regretted making the decision to get treated. She is living a dream of becoming a mother. Jane Ejako is now a happy mother after having her fibroids removed as well. On her part, Jeanne d'Arc had a myomectomy, and she's doing fine.
As is a very interesting report there. As we've heard from Nana, she blames the lack of funds and government commitment for the little information on the issue in Africa. What other ways can we raise awareness on the continent?
Okay, so Dr. Ngozi Obi, who I also interviewed in that report, said that there is need for doctors to do their part by giving more information to patients whenever they came to the clinics, and then, allay their fears that surgery shouldn't be the first option for operation. She mentioned that advocacy is very important, where the media is expected to play a huge role, to be able to sensitize people, especially women, on what fibroids is about. That it's sad that a condition that is very common among Black women doesn't get much coverage. Many people don't even understand what it means and how it affects the health of women. She also talked about going to different communities, taking it to the rural areas as well, because this is affecting many women. That is, it's hard for you not to know 1, 2, 3 people on the continent that hasn't either gone through it or has just got treated.
And on that point of going to rural areas and educating these women and having women to advocate for what fibroids are, some of these women may not have adequate resources to seek medical attention straight away. So what are some of the symptoms to look out for?
The symptoms are many. There is the heavy bleeding, heavy menstrual flow. That was what Jeanne d'Arc experienced. And then it's not just about the symptoms alone that women that have fibroids experience. It's what the symptoms cause at the end of the day. It could cause constipation. It could lead to kidney failure if the condition persisted and they didn't get treated on time. So heavy bleeding is one problem. And then there is multiple growths. And then pain under the abdomen. I recall she said that because she went through it as well. Her aunt had the condition as well, even her mother. So she said that while some could have heavy bleeding, some could have blood clots whenever they do their periods, and then it could be pains, and then during urination, they could experience pain. There are so many symptoms, actually. So it's not a one-size-fits-all kind of symptom that all women experience at the same time.
I've